I learned to measure collapse in heartbeats. The injured worker's pulse against my fingertips while I calculate how long until the bleeding stops or the shock sets in. The man pinned under half a metric ton of broken pavement had maybe 300 beats left before his body made the choice for him. "Stay still," I said, louder than necessary. He was screaming, which meant his lungs worked. Good sign. "I'm Micah Rosen, Department of Subsurface Safety. I'm going to get you out." The sinkhole had opened that morning in the old financial district, swallowing a municipal maintenance team and their drilling platform. I rode the emergency lift down through 23 vertical city blocks, past residential stacks and commercial floors, and the water reclamation plants on 70 until the shaft terminated at street level, what used to be street level, back when Manhattan had a surface. Now it was just the bottom layer of architecture, the foundation we kept building on top of because there was nowhere else to go. The hole itself was 5 meters wide, ringed with fractured concrete and twisted rebar. A woman in a municipal jumpsuit waved me over, her face slick with dust-paste sweat. "He's the priority. Legs crushed. We can't move the slab without a winch crew, and they're 20 minutes out." I dropped my medical pack and knelt at the edge. The worker, young, maybe Jonah's age, lay on his back with his left leg buried under concrete from mid-thigh down. His lips had gone grey. Not good. "What's your name?" "Cole. Cole Mendez. I can't feel my foot." "You won't for a while." I unclipped a compression injector from my belt. "This is going to hurt less in about 10 seconds. I pressed the injector against his neck. He flinched, then his breathing slowed as the medication shunted pain signals into a manageable hum. I pulled a pen light from my pocket and checked his pupils. Even dilation, reactive. No head trauma, just the leg. The woman crouched beside me. "Can you save it?" "Depends what's under that slab." I ran my hands along Cole's thigh, feeling for bone ends or the wet give of torn artery. Nothing shifted. Circulation was compromised. His toes would be ice cold if I could reach them, but no catastrophic bleed. "He'll keep it if the winch crew doesn't take 25 minutes instead of 20. Footsteps behind me. I didn't turn. "Micah Rosen." The voice carried the particular confidence of someone used to being obeyed. I finished strapping a pressure cuff around Cole's upper thigh, insurance against arterial bleed if moving the slab made things worse, and stood. Director Robert Avery stood at the sinkhole's rim in a suit that probably cost more than I made in a month. Mid-50s trim, with the kind of silver temples that read as distinguished in city media streams. He ran the Department of Subsurface Safety, which meant he was technically my boss, though I'd only seen him twice in person. Once at my sister's memorial service, once at my performance review 3 months later, where he'd asked if I was maintaining operational stability, and I'd said yes because the alternative was reassignment. I kept my voice flat. "If you're here for a status report, I'll have one after the winch crew pulls this slab. The winch crew can handle that." He stepped closer, boots crunching on pulverized concrete. "I'm here because of what's under it." I followed his gaze down into the hole. Past Cole, past the shattered drilling platform, the darkness dropped away into open space where there should have been solid bedrock. A crack ran along the hole's western edge, and through it I could see the mouth of a shaft with walls too smooth and vertical to be anything but built. "That's a vault access tunnel," Avery said. "Pre-severance construction. Federal commuter line, sealed for 2 centuries. He pulled a tablet from his jacket. "I'm authorizing immediate exploration. I want structural integrity and air composition within the hour." The winch crew arrived, 4 workers in safety harnesses with a portable rig. I supervised the slab extraction, slowly watching Cole's vitals, ready to clamp if an artery let go, and had him strapped to a stretcher within 12 minutes. His leg stayed attached. Crushed fibula, probably shattered knee, months of rehabilitation, but he'd walk again. Avery handed me a respirator and a wrist-mounted scanner. "You're the only medic on site with subsurface certification." If that shaft is stable, I need to know. If it's not, I need to know what killed you so we can avoid it next time. Funny. I clipped the scanner to my wrist. Jonah's expecting me home by 1900 hours. Your nephew's 16. He can reheat his own ration bar. 17. Jonah turned 17 last month. I didn't correct him. Avery wasn't the kind of man who cared about details unless they affected his timeline, and my nephew's birthday wasn't on his agenda. 3 of us descended. Me, a structural engineer named Pilar Velez, and a surveyor whose name I didn't catch. We anchored climbing harnesses to the drilling platform's frame and rappelled down through the sinkhole into the exposed shaft. My headlamp beam swept across walls lined with old ceramic tile. White, institutional, the kind they used in government buildings before the severance flooded half the eastern seaboard and turned cities into vertical stacks. Pilar drove an anchor bolt into the wall. It sank clean, threads biting into concrete that still had integrity. Solid, she said. Whoever sealed this knew what they were doing. We dropped another 30 meters. The shaft's walls transitioned from tile to raw concrete, then to something older. Granite blocks mortared together in a pattern that predated modern engineering standards. My scanner tracked air composition. Oxygen at 20.1%, nitrogen at 78%, trace carbon dioxide. Stale but breathable. The shaft terminated at a platform opening onto nothing. I clipped my harness to a beam and leaned out over the edge. Below us, maybe 15 meters down, lay soil, dark and level, stretching away into a space my headlamp couldn't reach. And above it, above the soil, where there should have been stone or water table or the compressed strata of drowned history, there was a sky, pale, even, lit by panels the size of warehouses, their surfaces glowing with the metallic white of industrial lighting, but smoother, less harsh. The light didn't flicker, it didn't hum, it just existed, turning what should have been a cave into something that looked like a false twilight. Pilar's voice came through the comms. "That's not possible." I aimed the scanner down and swept the space. The readout climbed, 15 meters to ground level, 100 meters to the ceiling. Then the measurement cut off, range exceeded. The plains beyond the shaft stretched farther than the scanner could track. I took readings anyway. Air pressure, stable. Temperature, 18 degrees warmer than the shaft. Humidity, 60%. "Someone's going to ask me how big this is," I said. "Tell them it's big enough to fit a city block. Then tell them you're lying, because it's bigger than that." Pilar unclipped a sample drill from her belt. "I'm going to need core samples before I clear descent." We spent 40 minutes mapping the shaft's final section. The walls were stable. The platform could hold weight. The drop to the soil below was manageable with proper rigging. I climbed back up and delivered the numbers to Avery. He didn't smile. Avery wasn't the kind of man who showed teeth, but something in his posture shifted. Relief, maybe. Or hunger. "You're certain the space is breathable?" "I'm certain I didn't die breathing it. Whether it'll support long-term habitation is a different question." "Good enough." He turned to the assembly of workers and city officials gathering at the sinkhole's edge. "We descend tomorrow. Full work crew. I want structural frames and observation posts within 48 hours. I thought about Jonah, waiting in our 2-room apartment on floor 93, probably watching city media streams and eating yesterday's leftovers because I'd missed dinner again. I thought about my sister, Sarah, trapped under a collapsed tunnel ceiling while I calculated triage priorities and made the call to pull teams back before the whole section went. I thought about Cole Mendez, who'd keep his leg because the winch crew arrived on time. "If this goes wrong," I said, "you'll need more than one medic." "Then don't let it go wrong." Avery dismissed me with a glance. I took the lift back up through New Manhattan's stacked districts, watching the walls scroll past. Residential blocks with laundry lines strung between balconies, commercial floors with narrow storefronts selling synthesized protein and grey vegetables grown in hydroponics bays. Industrial sections where fabricators churned out spare parts for the city's endless self-repair. Home was a corner unit on 93, 2 rooms and a bathroom we shared with the neighbours. I paid rent in city credits, the universal currency that bought food allotments and electricity and the privilege of not being relocated to lower floors where the air tasted like machine oil. Jonah was awake when I walked in, sprawled on the couch with a tablet propped against his knees. He looked up, dark curls falling across his forehead, Sarah's hair, Sarah's sharp cheekbones, Sarah's way of watching people like he was measuring their intentions. "You're late," he said. "Work. You're always late." I dropped my medical pack by the door and moved to the kitchenette. The ration bar I'd left him that morning sat untouched on the counter, still wrapped. I heated it in the steamer and handed it to him. "Eat." He took it without arguing. Good. Some days he fought me on it, claimed he wasn't hungry, said he'd eaten already, gave me reasons that were technically lies but close enough to truth that I couldn't call him on them without turning it into a confrontation. Tonight he just ate, chewing slowly while his eyes tracked back to the tablet screen. "What are you watching?" "News feed. There's a thing about the sinkhole in the financial district. They're saying it might be big." I sat down in the chair across from him. My wrist ached where I'd braced Cole's leg, and my shoulders felt like someone had tied weights to them. But I didn't let it show. "It's big." Jonah looked up. "How big?" "Big enough that Avery wants work crews down there tomorrow." "Can I come?" "No." "Why not?" "Because you're 17 and have school." "School's a joke. They're teaching us history from before the severance like it matters. Who cares what the old world looked like?" "It's gone." I didn't have an answer for that. He wasn't wrong. The schools on the upper floors taught history and basic engineering and enough literacy to read work contracts. But everyone knew the real education happened in apprenticeships and trade certifications. Jonah had 2 more years before he could apply for city employment, and until then he sat in classrooms with 40 other kids learning facts that wouldn't help him survive. "You're still going," I said. He went back to his tablet. Conversation over. I reheated my own ration bar and ate standing at the window. Outside, the city stretched up and down in layers, balconies stacked on balconies, lights glowing in 10,000 windows, the distant hum of the residential district's air cyclers pushing filtered atmosphere through endless corridors. Below us, far below, the old financial district sat in permanent dusk. Above us, the upper residential floors climbed toward the city's peak, where executives and department directors lived in apartments with real windows and natural light piped down from the surface. Somewhere under all of it, buried deeper than the water table, deeper than the flooded tunnels and drowned subway lines, a space weighted with its own sky and its own horizon. I finished eating and went to bed. The work crew assembled at the sinkhole at 0700 hours. 22 people. Riggers, haulers, a second medic named Ortiz, who looked about 12 but carried his certification tags like armor, and Lena Verger, Department of Subsurface Safety's senior biologist, mid-40s, sharp-eyed, with the kind of voice that cut through noise without rising in volume. "Tell me I didn't waste 4 years studying extremophile bacteria just to look at someone's basement," she said, staring down into the shaft. "It's not a basement." I checked my scanner's battery, fully charged. Basements don't have horizons. Avery arrived with a media crew, 2 cameras, 1 operator, and a woman in department-branded jacket who positioned herself beside the director while he talked about discovery and opportunity and New Manhattan's enduring resilience. I stopped listening. The words didn't matter. What mattered was the steel ramp crew already bolting frames together at the platform's edge. Industrial construction, designed to carry heavy loads down to the soil below. Pilar supervised the ramp's descent. It took 3 hours to anchor the frames and extend the walkway, a 45-degree incline with railings and non-slip plating. When the first section touched soil, everyone waited. Nothing collapsed. Nothing shifted. Pilar walked down the ramp alone, testing each meter, and when she reached the bottom, she drove a sensor stake into the ground and called up the readings. Stable. Soil's got structure, clay content, organic matter, root systems. She crouched and dug her fingers into the earth. This isn't fill. This grew here. I descended with the first crew. My boots hit the ramp's plating with a dull clang that echoed wrong. Too much open space, too much air to swallow sound. The temperature rose as I walked down, 15 degrees in the shaft climbing to 18 at ground level, and the air moved past my face with the slow push of circulation. The soil felt wrong. I stepped off the ramp onto the ground, and my boot sank maybe 2 centimeters. The surface compressed under my weight like dense moss, fibrous and yielding, then sprung back when I lifted my foot. I knelt and touched it with bare fingers. Warm, slightly damp. Organic texture, but too uniform. No rocks or rubble, just this strange living carpet that covered the plain. Lena crouched beside me and pulled a sample kit from her belt. She pressed a small cylinder into the soil, twisted, and extracted a core. Dark brown, threaded with pale filaments. She held it close to her face, studying the cross-section. These are root structures, but the density's wrong. They're too tightly woven. She bagged the sample. And they're warm. A hauler named Nash moved past us, carrying a portable sensor mast. Tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of man built for moving weight. He planted the mast 15 meters from the ramp and activated the beacon, a steady amber pulse that marked our perimeter. 6 more haulers spread out across the plain, establishing a grid. I tilted my head back and looked up at the ceiling. The panels were massive, each one maybe 30 meters across, set into frameworks that looked like reinforced girders but too smooth, too organic. The light they emitted didn't cast shadows. It filled the space evenly, turning everything into soft focus. No sun angle, no directionality, just presence. "How is this lit?" Lena asked. "I don't know." "Who built it?" "I don't know." "How long has it been here?" "I don't—" Nash's voice cut through the comms. "Movement. Tall grass, 30 meters northeast." Everyone stopped. I turned and saw it. A section of grass, taller than a man, pale stalks bending in a breeze I couldn't feel, shifting against the pattern of stillness, moving with direction. Pilar's voice came. "Size estimate?" "Big. Maybe 2 meters at the shoulder. Fast." "Everyone back to the ramp," I said. The thing came out of the grass at a dead run. 4 legs, plated back like overlapped shields, dark brown and ridged. Head low, mouth hinged in 3 parts that opened wide enough to swallow a human torso. It didn't make a sound. No roar, no challenge. Just committed to the charge with pure mechanical intent. Nash didn't run. He stood his ground, feet planted, and as the creature closed the distance, he grabbed the sensor mast and swung it like a club. The mast hit the creature's skull with a crack that traveled across the plain. The impact knocked the thing sideways, legs scrabbling for purchase. Nash reversed his grip and brought the mast down again, straight into the back of the creature's neck. Vertebrae crunched. The thing dropped. It twitched for maybe 10 seconds. Then it stopped. Nash stood over it, breathing hard, the sensor mast still in his hands. "Someone want to tell me what the hell that was?" Lena approached slowly, scanner active. She circled the corpse, recording. "Predator. Ambush hunter, probably. Look at the leg joints, built for short bursts, not endurance." I knelt beside the head. The mouth hung open, 3-part hinge lined with bone ridges instead of teeth. No tongue. No obvious sensory organs except 2 shallow pits near where the jaw hinged to the skull. The backplates were fused cartilage, overlapping like scale armor but solid, grown rather than attached. "Meyerbach," Pilar said. "We're calling it a Meyerbach." I opened my medical kit. A hauler named Evans sat on the ramp with his pant leg rolled up, 3 puncture wounds in his thigh arranged in a perfect triangle. Not deep, the Meyerbach hadn't gotten its jaw fully closed, but bleeding steadily. I irrigated the wounds with saline and packed them with coagulant gel. You're lucky, I said. Lucky? Evans's voice climbed. That thing almost took my leg off. Almost. Didn't. I secured a pressure bandage over the wounds. You'll have scars, but you'll walk fine. He limped back up the ramp with Ortiz shadowing him. I stayed at the bottom and watched Lena work. She'd opened the Meyerback's abdomen with a field knife and was documenting internal structures, dense muscle tissue, organs I didn't recognize, no obvious stomach. Just a long coiled tube that might have been intestine or might have been something else. It's a perfect predator, she said. No wasted mass. Everything serves the hunt. Can we kill them? Nash just did. I mean consistently, without losing people. She pulled a liver-colored organ from the body cavity and held it up to the light. Yes, they're not smart. They commit to the charge. You just need mass and leverage. Over the next 6 hours, we killed 3 more Meyerbacks. They came at us when we moved beyond the perimeter. The work crews adapted. They carried steel beams as weapons, travelled in pairs, and learned to watch the tall grass for movement. By the time Avery descended the ramp with his media crew, the plains felt less like a death trap and more like a place where people could work if they paid attention. Avery stood at the ramp's base and surveyed the space. How far does it extend? Pilar checked her scanner. Range exceeds measurement. We've mapped 200 meters in every direction, and there's no wall. Air quality. Breathable, no toxins. Temperatures stable. We're working in shirt-sleeve conditions. Avery turned to Lena. Biohazard assessment. The local fauna is hostile, but manageable. No airborne pathogens detected. Soil composition suggests a functioning ecosystem, which means there's a bottom to the food chain we haven't identified yet. The cameras recorded everything. The director's statement, the dead Meyerback being hauled onto a cargo pallet for further study, the expanse of soil and grass and that sky stretching away into distance. I wondered who was watching, wondered if Jonah had found the feed, wondered what Sarah would have thought, standing here looking at something no one in New Manhattan had seen in 200 years. Living space. Real, open, survivable space. Avery dismissed the media crew and walked to the perimeter. How long until we can establish permanent infrastructure? Weeks, Pilar said. Maybe months. We need to map the full extent, assess load-bearing capacity, identify water sources. 2 weeks. I want foundations poured and shelter frames erected within 2 weeks. Director, that's not 2 weeks, or I find someone who can make it happen. Pilar went silent. I should have stayed quiet. Should have focused on my job, treated injuries, kept my mouth shut about things that weren't my problem. But I thought about Sarah, crushed under a tunnel ceiling because the expansion timeline didn't allow for proper surveys. You're moving too fast, I said. Avery looked at me like I'd materialized out of the soil. Excuse me? This isn't dead rock. It's a living system. We don't know what we're walking on, what eats what, or what happens when we start building. Rushing this is how people die. People are dying now. In the city. From starvation and overcrowding and systems that fail faster than we can repair them. This, he gestured at the plains, is space. Resources. A future. I'm not waiting for perfect understanding when good enough will save lives. He walked back up the ramp. Conversation over. Lena moved beside me. He's not wrong. I know. But neither are you. The work crew packed equipment and ascended. I stayed at the bottom, watching the light fade. The ceiling panels dimmed in a slow, even gradient, turning from white to pale amber to something close to twilight. The temperature dropped 2 degrees. Not cold, just less warm. On the second day below, we pushed the perimeter out to 500 meters. The plains continued without variation, same fibrous soil, same tall grass, same light from above. The Meyerbacks learned to avoid groups. They still hunted, still charged, but now they picked off stragglers or waited for someone to walk alone. We lost no one. Nash and 3 other haulers carried beam weapons and moved like shepherds, watching the grass. Lena set up a specimen station near the ramp and began cataloguing samples. Soil cores, grass cuttings, meyerback tissue, water drawn from a depression that might have been a spring or might have been condensation pooling in a low point. Everything went into labelled containers and digital records. I spent the morning treating minor injuries, scraped knees from workers stumbling on the uneven ground, blisters from boots not designed for this terrain. One case of heat exhaustion when a rigger forgot to drink water during a 6-hour shift. Nothing catastrophic, nothing Sarah-shaped. At midday, Lena called me over to her station. "Look at this." She held up a glass slide with a soil sample pressed flat. Under magnification, the filaments I'd seen in the core sample resolved into something more complex, thread-like structures that branched and reconnected, forming a dense network. These aren't roots, they're more like mycelia, fungal networks, except they're warm. How warm? 37 degrees, human body temperature. I stared at the slide. That's not possible. It's not impossible, it's just improbable. She switched slides, this one showing grass cross-sections. The stalks have circulatory systems, actual vessels that transport fluid, and the fluid's viscosity matches blood more than sap. You're saying the grass is alive. I'm saying everything here might be alive in ways we don't recognize yet. The soil, the grass, maybe even the structure holding up that ceiling. She gestured at the panels overhead. It's biology. A comms alert went off. Pilar's voice, tight with something I couldn't identify. "We've got company, Northeast Ridge, not Meyerbachs." I grabbed my medkit and ran. The ridge rose maybe 30 meters above the plains, a natural formation, or what looked natural, covered in the same fibrous ground cover. A group stood at the ridge's crest, silhouetted against the pale ceiling light. 10, maybe 12 figures, human proportions, standing upright, watching us. Lena reached me, breathless. "Who are they?" "I don't know." One of the figures stepped forward. Smaller than the others, lean-build, bare-chested, wearing something that might have been a harness or might have been part of their body, hard to tell from this distance. They raised one hand, palm out. Acknowledgement. "We exist. We see you. We are here." Pilar's voice came through the comms. "Orders?" I didn't have orders. I wasn't command. I was medical, which meant I waited for someone else to make the call and then dealt with the consequences. But Avery wasn't here, and Pilar was asking me, and the figures on the ridge weren't moving. "Hold position," I said. "No weapons. Let them decide what happens next." We stood there for maybe 5 minutes. Long enough for my legs to ache. Long enough for Lena to pull out a sketch pad and start drawing quick profiles of the figures. Long enough for Nash to shift his weight from foot to foot, beam weapon held loosely but ready. The figures turned and walked back over the ridge. Gone. Lena lowered her pad. "That was first contact." I keyed the comms. "Everyone back to base. We're calling this in." Avery descended within the hour. He listened to the report, reviewed Lena's sketches and stared at the ridge like he could make the figures reappear through force of will. "Did they speak?" "No," Lena said. "They just watched." "Were they armed?" "Couldn't tell. Too much distance." Avery pulled his tablet and began typing. Probably a report to city administration. Probably recommendations for next steps. Probably a timeline that wouldn't allow for caution. "We continue as planned," he said. "Double the perimeter. Map every ridge and depression within 1,000 meters. And if they come back, establish communication." "With what?" I asked. "We don't speak their language. They don't speak ours." "Then use what everyone understands. Objects, actions. Trade if they want it, avoidance if they don't." He looked at me directly. "You're medical. They're human. Find common ground." He ascended the ramp, leaving us with instructions and no guidance. Lena sat down on a supply crate and opened her sketch pad. She'd captured the lead figure with surprising detail. the harness running across their chest, the way they stood with weight forward on the balls of their feet, the angle of their head as they watched us. "They're adapted," she said quietly. "Look at the harness. It's not clothing. It's integrated. Grown into the body or attached surgically, I can't tell which." "How long would that take?" "Generations. If they're descendants of whoever built this place, they've been down here for at least a century. Maybe longer." She closed the pad. "They're not visitors, Micah. They're natives." I thought about Avery's timeline. 2 weeks. Foundations and shelter frames. Infrastructure for thousands of people who needed space and food and a future that didn't collapse under its own weight. I thought about the figures on the ridge, watching us with what might have been curiosity or might have been assessment. 2 civilizations meeting for the first time. One desperate, one adapted, both needing the same ground. Nothing about that felt safe. On the 3rd day below, they came back to us. I was running a medical inventory near the ramp when Nash's voice came through the comms. "Micah, northeast quadrant, move slow." I grabbed my kit and walked. Lena fell in beside me. We rounded a cluster of equipment crates and saw them. 5 figures. Closer than before, maybe 20 meters, standing at the edge of the tall grass. The lead figure from the ridge stood front and center, harness visible now as a complex arrangement of straps and plates that wrapped around their torso and disappeared beneath what looked like a short skirt made from woven fiber. Something stiffer than cloth. Dried plant material, maybe. Or animal hide. They watched us approach with eyes that tracked movement but didn't blink often enough. "Slowly," Lena whispered. We stopped at 10 meters, close enough to see details. The harness wasn't leather or fabric. It was cartilage, pale and ridged, growing directly from plates along the figure's ribs. The straps connected to bone fixtures. The whole assembly looked like it had been shaped over time, sculpted through pressure and growth rather than carved or sewn. The figure spoke, a series of percussive tones that came from their mouth but felt shaped by something else. Maybe the harness, maybe bone structure I couldn't see. The sounds were sharp, clipped, organized like language, but nothing I recognized. Lena pulled a sketch pad and pen from her pocket. She moved slowly, showing the pad, then drew a simple stick figure. She pointed to herself, then to me, then to the figure. The figure tilted their head, watching, processing. Lena drew a circle. She pointed at the ceiling panels, then drew a line down to the ground and sketched tiny stick figures at the bottom. The figure stepped closer, 5 meters now, close enough that I could see the mouthpiece, a bone plate maybe 3 centimeters across, fitted against the roof of their mouth, with small resonating chambers visible through the gap when they spoke. They pointed at Lena's drawing, then at us, then at themselves, understanding, crude but present. The figure reached to their belt. I tensed, ready to move, and pulled out a small object, smooth, dark brown, shaped like a handle with a blunt head. A tool. They held it out, palm up, offering. Lena glanced at me. I nodded. She stepped forward and took the tool. It was warm, denser than wood but with a grain texture. She turned it over in her hands, examining. The figure watched, then pointed at Lena's pen. "They want to trade," I said. Lena hesitated, then offered the pen. The figure took it, studied it for 3 seconds, and tucked it into their belt. Then they spoke again, the same percussive tone, and gestured behind them, toward the ridge. "Come, follow." They turned and walked. Lena looked at me. "Should we?" "Not alone. Get Nash and 2 others. Leave the beam weapons here." We followed at a distance. The figure led us across the plains, past the tall grass, toward the ridge we'd seen them on before. As we climbed, I noticed the ground changed. Less fibrous, more compact, with exposed patches that looked like stone, but felt too smooth when I touched them. The ridge's far side dropped into a shallow valley, and at the valley's base, rising from the soil like a ship's hull, the nursery. I'd expected a settlement, structures, maybe huts or shelters cobbled from scavenged materials. Instead, I saw ribs. Massive curving forms that arched from the ground and met overhead, creating a framework that looked organic and architectural at the same time. The spaces between the ribs were filled with walls that flexed visibly, moving with a slow rhythm like breathing. The surface was mottled brown and cream, textured like bark, but smoother. Steam rose from vents along the roof, carrying warmth into the cooler air. The structure was easily 100 meters across. Maybe more, big enough to house hundreds of people. The figure led us to the entrance, a gap between two ribs where the wall had pulled back, creating an opening. They stepped through without hesitation. I followed. Inside, the air was warmer, humid. The floor underfoot wasn't soil. It was something solid but yielding, like walking on dense rubber. The walls curved inward, forming chambers and corridors that branched off the central space. People moved through the shadows. Not many, maybe a dozen visible, but their presence felt integrated with the structure. They touched the walls as they passed. They leaned against ribs. They belonged here. The lead figure stopped at a wall and placed both hands flat against the surface. The wall darkened where they touched, then began to extrude something. A beam, growing from the wall like a branch, expanding slowly until it reached maybe a meter in length. The figure pulled it free with a sharp twist. The wall healed behind it, surface smoothing. They handed me the beam. It was warm, dense. The grain ran in whirls like wood fused with metal, and when I tapped it with my knuckles, it rang like struck glass. Strong, light, functional. "This is a factory," Lena whispered, "or a hospital, or both." The figure spoke, a different tone this time, softer, more sustained. They gestured at the walls, at the people moving through the chambers, at the beam in my hands. Home. I understood then the meaning underneath. We exist. This is ours. We see you building, and we are watching. The figure led us back outside. At the ridge, they stopped and pointed at the distant ramp where our crew worked, then at the nursery. Then they placed one hand over their chest and spoke a single tone. Kesh. A name. Their name. Lena pointed at herself. Lena. Then at me. Micah. Kesh repeated both, tones not quite matching but close enough. They gestured back toward the ramp, a clear dismissal. We walked back slowly. Behind us, Kesh stood at the ridge's crest, watching. By the time we reached base, Lena had filled 3 pages with sketches and notes. I sat on a supply crate while she paced, talking fast. That wasn't a building. It was a cultivated organism. Did you see how the wall responded to touch? It grew the beam to specification. That's not construction. That's directed biology. How long would it take to develop that kind of technology? Generations, maybe centuries if they started from scratch. She stopped pacing. They're not primitives living in caves, Micah. They're engineers. They've adapted to this place in ways we're only beginning to understand. I thought about Avery's timeline. 2 weeks, foundations and shelter frames. I thought about Kesh's hand over their chest. Home. I thought about what would happen when the city decided the nursery stood where they wanted to build. We need to tell Avery, I said. He'll want to take it. I know. We can't let that happen. I don't know if we can stop it. Lena sat down beside me. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The ceiling panels dimmed toward twilight. Work crews packed equipment and ascended the ramp. Nash and his haulers stood perimeter guard, watching the tall grass for movement. 2 worlds, 2 kinds of desperate, 1 piece of ground, and a nursery that breathed like a living thing, waiting to see which future would arrive first, negotiation or conquest. The city decided we'd found salvation in the span of a single news cycle. I watched it happen from our apartment on 93 while Jonah ate breakfast. Actual eggs, protein synth, but close enough to real that he didn't complain. The ration increase came through that morning, Director Avery's face on every screen explaining how the underground represented viable expansion territory, an agricultural opportunity at continental scale. He used words like measured integration and sustainable development, but the subtext was clear. We're moving in, and we're moving fast. Jonah leaned toward the tablet. Egg forgotten. They're really doing it, building permanent structures. That's what the director said. Will you be assigned there full-time? Probably. I finished my coffee. Real coffee. Another ration increase, black and bitter and worth the credit cost. They'll need medical staff on site once construction crews rotate through. Can I apply for work detail? No. Why not? I'm 17. I can... You're finishing school first. He set his fork down too hard. The plate rattled. School doesn't matter. You know it doesn't matter. This is actual opportunity, and you want me sitting in a classroom learning dead history while everyone else is going to get hurt. I kept my voice level. The underground has predators. It has environmental hazards we don't understand yet. And it has people who were there first, watching us build on their territory. That's not opportunity. That's a disaster waiting for the right trigger. Jonah stood and carried his plate to the sanitizer. You always think the worst is going to happen. That's my job. Your job is treating injuries after they happen, not preventing them by keeping everyone locked away from anything useful. He left for school without looking back. The door sealed behind him with a pneumatic hiss. Standard residential unit closure, designed to maintain pressure differentials between floors. I reported to the underground at 0800 hours. The vault throat had transformed in 3 days. Steel platforms extended from the original ramp. Security checkpoints flanked the entrance, and a queue of workers stretched back 20 meters, all waiting for clearance to descend. I recognized the signs. Bureaucracy catching up to momentum. Administration trying to control something that had already escaped containment. A woman in security uniform stopped me at the checkpoint. Identification and assignment. I showed my department tags. Medical, subsurface safety. She scanned the tags and waved me through. Captain Dalton wants all medical personnel reporting to the forward command post. Northeast quadrant marked with amber beacons. Who's Captain Dalton? Security detail. He's running protection protocols for the construction crews. I descended into warmth and false twilight. The ramp's steel plating rang under work boots, hundreds of feet per hour now, maybe thousands per day once the rotation schedule locked in. The planes had changed. Survey stakes marked a grid extending 500 meters from the vault throat. Equipment crates clustered near the ramp's base. And at the grid's northeast corner, a cluster of prefab shelters formed what the security guard had called forward command. Captain Dalton stood outside the largest shelter, reviewing a tablet while 2 soldiers, actual soldiers, not just security guards, flanked him. He was maybe 40, compact build, with the kind of posture that came from military training and hadn't softened with civilian work. When he saw me approaching, he dismissed the soldiers with a gesture and extended his hand. Micah Rosen, I've read your file. I shook his hand. Firm grip. Measured pressure. I didn't know subsurface had military oversight. We don't. I'm private contract, hired by Director Avery to ensure workers can operate safely in hostile terrain. He gestured at the planes. You've been here since initial descent. Tell me about the Meyerbacks. Ambush predators, fast in short bursts. They commit to the charge, which makes them predictable if you don't run. Mass and leverage work. We've put down 6 with no fatalities. Injuries? Puncture wounds, mostly. 1 compound fracture when a hauler got clipped during a charge. Manageable. And the natives. I chose my words carefully. They're called belowborn. They've been observing us. We've established basic communication. Object exchange, visual reference. They're not hostile, but they're watching. Watching from where? I pointed toward the ridge. There's a structure in the valley beyond that rise. They call it the nursery. It's biological architecture, Cultivated organism that grows tools and structures on demand. They live inside it. Dalton typed notes into his tablet. Population estimate. Unknown. We've seen maybe 20 individuals. Armed? Can't confirm. They haven't threatened us. He looked up from the tablet. I'm deploying split cradles at all perimeter points. Spring-loaded frames designed to immobilize threats without lethal force. If the Belowborn stay peaceful, they'll never see them deployed. If they don't, we'll have containment protocols ready. They're not the threat. The Myabaks are animals. Animals respond to consistent force. People require different management. He closed the tablet. I'm told you have a nephew. 17. Finished secondary certification. My jaw tightened. Jonah Rosen. Why? I'm hiring runners. Light-duty personnel who move messages and equipment between work sites. Pays better than school stipends. Looks good on employment applications. I've got 3 positions open. He's still in school. He submitted an application this morning. It's already approved. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not surprised. Jonah had made his intentions clear at breakfast. But the speed of it. The fact that Dalton knew my nephew's name before we'd met. The casual mention of approval, like my opinion, didn't factor into the equation. I'd prefer he finish his education first. Preference noted. Dalton's expression didn't change. But he's 17, old enough to sign contracts, and we need reliable personnel who understand the stakes. He paused. You want him safe? Having him here where you can see him is safer than having him resent you from 93 floors up. He walked back into the command shelter before I could respond. Lena found me at the medical station, a prefab unit with examination table, supply lockers, and enough room for 2 people if neither of them breathed deeply. She carried a specimen case and her perpetual tablet, both covered in soil dust. Tell me you've documented the sheathgrass phenomenon. I pulled up my medical log. 7 cases so far. Workers developing subcutaneous threads where the grass made contact with exposed skin. Threads embed within 6 hours, harden within 12. If left untreated, they migrate toward bone structures. I need to see an extraction. You're in luck. I've got one scheduled in 20 minutes. The patient was a technician named Morris, who'd spent yesterday mapping utility routes through the tall grass. He'd rolled his sleeves up for better mobility, and now both forearms showed raised lines under the skin, pale threads visible through the dermis, radiating from his wrists toward his elbows. I had him sit on the examination table and prepped a local anesthetic. This is going to take a while. How long? Depends on how deep they've penetrated. I injected anesthetic at 4 points along his left forearm and waited for the numbness to set. Then I made a small incision at his wrist and began the extraction. The threads were tougher than suture material but more brittle. I used forceps to grip the exposed end and pulled gently, watching Morris's face for pain response. The thread came out slowly, maybe 2 centimeters before it snapped. I repositioned the forceps and tried again. Another 2 centimeters. Snap. Lena leaned close, recording with her tablet's camera. They're segmented, breaking at the joints, which means I can't pull them out whole. I made another incision further up the forearm and extracted a second section. This is going to leave scars. By the time I finished both arms, Morris had 18 small incisions and a collection of thread segments in a specimen dish. I dressed the wounds with synthetic skin and prescribed antibiotics. Keep the dressings dry. Come back in 3 days for follow-up. And for the love of God, wear long sleeves. Morris left. Lena stayed, examining the thread segments under magnification. They're hollow, she said. Look at the cross-section. These aren't roots. They're more like capillaries. And they're still warm. How is that possible? I don't know, but I'm documenting everything. She transferred the segments to her specimen case. I'm filing a report recommending quarantine protocols for anyone with extended grass exposure, and I'm suggesting we slow the expansion timeline until we understand the full scope of biological interaction. Avery won't like that. Avery can dislike it from the safety of the city, while I deal with the consequences down here. She closed the case. Have you seen the nursery since the first visit? No. Kesh hasn't approached again. They're watching. Every time I look toward that ridge, I see silhouettes. She tucked the case under her arm. We're building on someone's doorstep and we haven't asked permission. I thought about Dalton's split cradles, containment protocols, management strategies for people he'd never spoken to. I don't think asking is part of the plan. Jonah arrived for his first shift at 1400 hours, wearing a security patch on his shoulder and carrying a comm unit clipped to his belt. He saw me at the medical station and waved, casual, like this was routine, before reporting to the command shelter. I watched him walk across the grid, dodging equipment crates and work crews, his stride confident in a way that made my chest tighten. He looked like Sarah, moved like her, had her certainty that the world would make space if you just pushed forward hard enough. She'd been wrong about that. I forced myself back to work. More thread extractions, a sprained ankle, one case of heat exhaustion when a rigger forgot the underground's temperature ran warmer than the city's climate-controlled floors, routine injuries, nothing catastrophic. At 1600 hours, Kesh appeared at the perimeter. Not alone this time. 3 other below-borns stood with them, 2 adults and what looked like a child, maybe 10 years old, wearing a smaller version of the cartilage harness. They didn't approach the worksite, just stood at the grid's edge, watching. Lena moved beside me. What are they doing? Observing, same as before. Should we approach? Not without permission. Kesh raised one hand, the same palm-out gesture from our first encounter, then turned and walked back towards the ridge. The others followed. The child looked back once before disappearing into the tall grass. They're bringing families now, Lena said quietly, showing their children what we're building. I didn't answer. There was nothing to say that wouldn't sound like an apology or a justification, and neither felt adequate. That evening, Kesh returned alone. They walked directly to the medical station and gestured at the entrance. I stepped outside. Lena joined me. Kesh pointed at themselves, then at us, then toward the ridge. The meaning was clear. Follow me. We walked across the plains as the ceiling panels dimmed toward twilight. The temperature dropped 2 degrees. Kesh led us through the tall grass, moving with the confidence of someone who knew which routes the Meyerbachs avoided, and we climbed the ridge to the nursery's entrance. Inside, the structure had changed. The ribs still curved overhead, the walls still breathed with slow rhythm. But where before we'd seen maybe a dozen people, now there were 30, maybe 40. Children played in the corridors. Adults tended to trays of growing substrate arranged along the walls. An elderly woman sat near the entrance, her harness so integrated with her ribs that the bone plates looked like natural armor. Kesh led us through the central chamber to a smaller space near the back. Here the walls glowed faintly. Bioluminescence, maybe, or some property of the material I didn't understand. A low platform held trays of food, tubers with waxy rinds, greens whose stems had the crunch of celery, and something that looked like fruit but smelled like fresh bread. Kesh gestured at the trays, then at us, offering. Lena pulled out her scanner and checked the food for toxins. The readout came back clean. She picked up one of the tubers and bit into it carefully, chewed, swallowed, waited. Starchy, slightly sweet, dense nutrients. She took another bite. It's good. I tried the greens. They tasted like spinach crossed with cucumber, crisp and hydrating. The breadfruit had a yeasty tang and left my fingers sticky with natural sugars. Real food. Grown food. Not synthesized protein or hydroponic vegetables that tasted like the nutrient solution they'd been raised in. This was what the city needed. What we'd been starving for while rationing out grey bars and calling it sustenance. Kesh watched us eat, then moved to the wall. They placed both hands flat against the surface and held them there for maybe 10 seconds. The wall darkened under their palms, then began to extrude a beam, similar to the one I'd seen before but longer, 1.5 meters, maybe 2. The grain spiraled in perfect whirls, and when Kesh pulled it free, the wall healed seamlessly. They handed the beam to Lena. She tested its weight, light, maybe 5 kilograms. "Load-bearing capacity is insane," she whispered. "This is stronger than steel and 1/4 of the weight." Kesh spoke through their bone mouthpiece, a series of tones I was starting to recognize as questions. Lena pulled out her tablet and sketched quickly. A simple shelter frame, beams arranged in a dome pattern. She showed the drawing to Kesh. Kesh studied it, then pointed at the beam in Lena's hands. They made a gesture that looked like stacking, then spreading. Building. "They understand construction," Lena said. "They're asking what we're building." I pulled out my comm unit and brought up the site plans, the grid layout, the proposed permanent ramp, the foundation markers for shelter frames. I showed Kesh the display. Kesh stared at the screen for a long time. Then they zoomed in on the northeast section, the area where the proposed ramp intersected the ridge, and tapped the image twice. They looked at me, then at the nursery's walls, then back at the screen. Understanding hit me like cold water. The ridge wasn't a geographic feature, it was the nursery's outer rib, and we were planning to cut through it. Kesh walked to the wall and placed their hand against it again. This time, instead of extruding, the wall rippled under their touch. A pulse traveled through the structure, and I felt it under my feet, a vibration like a heartbeat. Kesh turned back to us and placed one hand over their own chest. Then they touched the wall. Then they pointed at the screen, at the proposed ramp, cutting through the ridge. "Home. You're building through our home." Lena closed the tablet. "We need to tell Avery. He already knows the nursery is here. He doesn't know the ridge is structural. He doesn't know cutting through it will compromise the entire complex. Will he care?" Lena didn't answer. Kesh led us back outside. At the ridge's crest, they stopped and pointed at the worksite, at the lights glowing in the false twilight, at the equipment crates and prefab shelters, at the ramp descending from the vault throat. Then they pointed at the nursery behind us. Then they placed both hands over their chest and spoke a single sustained tone that carried across the plains like a bell. We walked back to the worksite in silence. The ceiling panels had dimmed to their lowest setting. Deep twilight, enough light to navigate but not enough to work by. The day shift had ended. Night shift crews moved through the grid, setting up portable lights and organizing equipment for tomorrow's construction. I found Jonah at the command shelter, logging equipment transfers while Dalton reviewed manifests. When he saw me, he straightened. "I was going to calm you. I'm assigned to night shift starting tomorrow." "That's not safe." "It's the same work, just different hours. The Meyerbacks hunt at night, and there are guards, split cradles at every perimeter point. Captain Dalton says the night shift is actually safer because the work crews are smaller and easier to protect." I looked at Dalton. He met my gaze without expression. "It's good work, Micah, and it pays better than day shift." Jonah tucked the tablet under his arm. "I'm bunking in crew quarters tonight. Easier than making the climb up and back. You have school tomorrow." I withdrew this afternoon. It's official. He walked away before I could respond. Dalton returned to his manifests like nothing had happened. I went to the medical station and filed reports until exhaustion made the words blur. Then I climbed the ramp back to the city, rode the lift to 93, and sat in an empty apartment wondering when I'd lost the ability to protect anyone. The shiver tide arrived 3 days later. No warning. Just a temperature drop that went from 5 degrees to -3 in the span of 20 minutes. I was treating a worker for sheathgrass exposure when frost started forming on the medical station's exterior walls. Lena burst through the door, breath steaming. "Everyone inside, now. This is environmental failure. Workers abandoned their posts and ran for the prefab shelters. I grabbed my medical kit and followed Lena toward the nursery. The temperature kept dropping. -5 degrees, -7. My fingers went numb inside my gloves. What is this? Thermal regulation failure. The ceiling panels must cycle through cooling phases to prevent overheating. I should have predicted this. Biological systems need temperature variation, but I didn't expect it to drop this fast. We reached the nursery's entrance. Kesh stood there with 4 other below-born, gesturing us inside. We didn't hesitate. The interior was warmer, maybe 3 degrees, but enough to stop the frost from spreading. The walls had changed texture, surface tightening like clenching muscle. Harder, less yielding. The breathing rhythm had slowed. Kesh led us deeper into the structure, to a chamber where 20 below-born had already gathered. They stood in a circle, each one gripping a harness ring that had extruded from the wall. Bone fixtures about waist height, spaced evenly around the chamber. Kesh pointed at 2 empty fixtures, then mimed gripping and holding. Lena and I took positions. The fixtures were smooth and warm. As I gripped mine, I felt the wall respond, the surface darkening where my palm made contact, then slowly warming. Heat spreading from the wall into my hand, up my arm, radiating into my core. It's thermally responsive, Lena said. Body heat triggers the warming function. This is how they survive the cold cycles. Outside the chamber, something moved. Heavy footsteps, the blunt percussion of impact against the nursery's outer wall. "Maya back," I said. Kesh spoke, a low, firm tone. "Stay. Wait." The impacts continued, rhythmic, testing. The creature wasn't trying to break through, just checking whether the shelter was viable prey. After maybe 5 minutes, the sounds moved away. We stood there for an hour. The temperature outside dropped to -7 degrees according to Lena's scanner, then held steady. Inside, the chamber stayed at 3, maintained by the collective body heat of everyone anchored to the wall fixtures. Children leaned against their parents. The elderly woman I'd seen before stood alone, her harness integrated so completely that she looked like a permanent fixture herself. This was survival. When the temperature finally stabilized and began climbing back toward normal, Kesh released their fixture and gestured toward the exit. The crisis had passed. We walked back to the worksite. The prefab shelters had held, but barely. Frost damage marked every exposed surface, and 2 workers had mild hypothermia from trying to ride out the cold in inadequate gear. I treated them with thermal wraps and hot liquids, knowing we'd been lucky. Lena filed an incident report. I submitted medical logs, and Director Avery issued a statement calling the event manageable under proper supervision, and announcing that construction would proceed as scheduled. Captain Dalton staged his demonstration 2 days later. I didn't know it was coming. No announcement, no briefing. Just Jonah running up to the medical station at 0900 hours, breathless and excited. "You need to see this. Captain Dalton's team captured a Mayaback." I followed him to the northeast perimeter. A crowd had gathered. Workers, security personnel, and a media crew with 3 cameras. Dalton stood at the center, supervising while 4 soldiers maneuvered a split cradle into position. The cradle was elegant in its brutality. 2 steel frames connected by pneumatic pistons, designed to clap shut around a target's neck and lock in place. One frame lay flat on the ground. The other hung suspended from a portable crane, positioned above a shallow pit where something thrashed against netting. A Mayaback. Smaller than the ones we'd killed before, maybe 1.5 meters at the shoulder, but fully grown and furious. Dalton addressed the crowd. Mayabacks respond to consistent application of force. What you're about to see is a non-lethal containment protocol designed to protect workers without unnecessary killing. He signaled the crane operator. The upper frame descended. The Mayaback thrashed harder, trying to escape the netting. The frame locked into position around its neck. Pistons engaged with a hydraulic hiss. The cradle clamped shut. The Maya back went rigid. Not dead. Its legs still moved, mouth still worked, but immobilized. Completely under control. The soldiers attached guide cables to the cradle and began dragging the creature across the plains. It couldn't fight, couldn't bite, could only be pulled like cargo while cameras recorded every meter. I looked toward the ridge. Kesh stood there with a dozen other Billowborn, watching. The demonstration continued for 10 minutes. Dalton explained the cradle's mechanics, discussed deployment strategies, answered questions about load capacity and release mechanisms. The media crew captured everything. When it was over, the soldiers dragged the Maya back to the far perimeter and released it. The creature fled into the tall grass, neck probably bruised but otherwise functional. Dalton dismissed the crowd. Workers returned to their posts. The media crew packed their equipment. Kesh remained on the ridge, motionless. Then they turned and walked back toward the nursery. The other Billowborn followed. Lena moved beside me. That was a mistake. He was showing the workers they're protected. He was showing the Billowborn we view everything here as something to be controlled, including them. I thought about the split cradles deployed at every perimeter point. Thought about Dalton's words. People require different management. We need to talk to Avery. About what? The fact that we're building on occupied territory? He already knows. He just doesn't care. Lena pulled out her tablet and began drafting a formal recommendation. Slow the expansion timeline. Establish quarantine protocols for biological contamination. Negotiate corridor access with the Billowborn rather than building through their infrastructure. She submitted it at 1100 hours. By 1300, it had been archived without response. Director Avery descended that evening with site plans and a timeline that felt like watching a countdown timer on a bomb. He assembled the senior crew, me, Lina, Pilar, Dalton, and 6 others, in the command shelter and displayed the updated grid on a projection screen. Phase 2 begins tomorrow. We're establishing permanent infrastructure across the following coordinates. He highlighted a section of the grid that cut directly through the northeast ridge. Primary objective: a reinforced ramp with load capacity sufficient for heavy transport. Secondary objective: foundation frames for agricultural development. Timeline: 2 weeks from first cutting to operational deployment. Pilar leaned forward. Director, that ridge is structurally integrated with the nursery. Cutting through it will compromise. The ridge is a geographical feature. We're not demolishing the native structure. We're creating a parallel access route that happens to utilize the most efficient gradient. It's not parallel. It's through the load-bearing rib. Then we'll reinforce it. Steel supports, proper engineering. This isn't guesswork, Pilar. We've done the calculations. Your calculations assume dead rock. The nursery is a living structure. It responds to injury differently than... The nursery will adapt, or it won't. Either way, this city needs agricultural access to those plains, and the shortest viable route goes through that ridge. He closed the display. Construction begins at 0600 hours. Captain Dalton will coordinate security. Medical teams on standby for industrial accidents. Questions? I stood. The Billowborn have made it clear that Ridge is part of their home. Cutting through it without negotiation is... Not negotiation, it's resource allocation. This underground was sealed for 2 centuries. Nobody owned it. Nobody maintained it. We're the first organized society to reach it, which gives us priority development rights. That's not how the Billowborn see it. The Billowborn can submit formal objections through proper administrative channels if they'd like to be heard. Until then, we proceed. He dismissed us. Outside the shelter, Lena gripped her tablet so hard I thought she'd crack the screen. He's going to destroy it. The nursery, the food production, everything they've built. Not if we find another route. There is no other route, not one that meets his timeline. Then we make one. I found Kesh at dawn. They stood at the ridge's crest with 3 other Billowborn, watching work crews assemble at the base of the slope. Cutting equipment. Steel frames, Industrial supports designed to hold the ridge stable while they carved a highway through its spine. I approached slowly. Kesh turned, saw me, and waited. I pulled out my comm unit and showed them the site plans. The proposed ramp, the cutting path, the timeline. Then I made a gesture, cutting through the ridge, then pointing at the nursery and shaking my head. Bad. Wrong. Kesh studied the display. They spoke through their mouthpiece, tones I couldn't decipher, then gestured for me to follow. They led me behind the nursery, past the chambers where families slept, to a narrow passage I hadn't seen before. The walls here were older, darker, surface textured like scar tissue. Kesh touched the wall and it responded sluggishly, warming but not glowing. The passage descended. Maybe a 15-degree gradient, but sustained. We walked for 10 minutes, maybe more, following the curve of the tunnel as it spiraled deeper into the underground's foundation. Then it opened. Another chamber. Smaller than the main nursery spaces, but functional. And at the far end, a shaft. Vertical. Narrow. Leading up. Kesh pointed at the shaft, then at me, then back toward where the city's ramp descended. Connecting. An alternative route. This goes to the surface? Kesh nodded. Or made the gesture that seemed like nodding, a forward tilt of the head. I pulled out my scanner and checked the shaft. Breathable air. Stable walls. A passage wide enough for 2 people side by side. Maybe 3 if they didn't mind close quarters. Not viable for heavy transport. Not suitable for convoys or industrial equipment. But perfect for people. For cargo haulers carrying food. For a corridor that demanded care instead of conquest. I took measurements, mapped anchor points, calculated what it would take to make this passage safe for regular use. Then I looked at Kesh and nodded. Another way. A route that didn't require cutting through the nursery's ribs. Kesh led me back to the surface. At the ridge's base, work crews had begun positioning the cutting equipment. Dalton supervised from a safe distance. Jonah moved through the crowd, relaying messages between crew chiefs and the command shelter. I climbed down and found Lena at her specimen station. There's an alternate route, maintenance tunnel behind the nursery. It goes all the way up, probably connects to the old city infrastructure. Can it handle the load? Not for convoys, but for people, for trade. It's viable. Avery won't accept it. He wants the highway, not a footpath. Then we make him see what the highway costs. I requested a meeting with Director Avery and Captain Dalton. Got 15 minutes in the command shelter, both of them standing like I was wasting their time. I showed them the measurements, explained the tunnel, laid out a plan for controlled access that would preserve the nursery while still allowing the city to establish agricultural exchange. Avery listened without interrupting. When I finished, he set down his tablet. Your alternate route is too narrow. It can't support the transport volume we need. It can support the initial phase. We establish trade relationships with the below-born, learn their agricultural methods, negotiate expansion as both sides. I'm not negotiating with a population that doesn't have formal governance. There's no one to negotiate with, no council, no authority structure we recognize. Kesh speaks for them. Kesh is one person with a bone flute and a harness. That's not governmental infrastructure. That's a tribal leader at best. He picked up the tablet again. The ramp proceeds as planned. If you have concerns about the nursery's structural integrity, submit them through proper engineering channels. Dalton walked me out. At the shelter's entrance, he stopped. You're trying to prevent something that's already happening. That's not medicine. That's politics. It's triage, preventing injury before it occurs. No, it's choosing sides. He looked past me towards the ridge, where Kesh still stood watching. And you've chosen wrong. The cutting began at 0600 hours the next morning. Plasma torches, industrial saws, equipment designed to carve through reinforced concrete and bedrock. The crews positioned scaffolding against the ridge's face and began marking cut lines, precise measurements, engineered tolerances, calculations that assumed the ridge was dead stone waiting to be shaped. Kesh appeared at 0700 with 30 below Bourne. They stood in a line between the scaffolding and the nursery's entrance, making their position clear. Witness, opposition, presence. Dalton deployed security personnel. Lena moved between the crews and the Bellowborn, tablet out, recording everything. When Dalton tried to wave her back, she ignored him. "This is documentation. You want a record of what happens next, or do you want to explain later why there isn't one?" He let her stay. The first cut went in at 0800. The plasma torch bit into the ridge's surface and a low tone travelled through the structure. The nursery shuddered. Hairline cracks appeared across its outer wall, spreading from the ridge like roots seeking water. The breathing rhythm stuttered. The walls flexed, contracting when they should have expanded. Kesh spoke. A single sustained tone that carried across the plains. "Stop!" The cutting crews paused. Dalton keyed his comm. "Continue operation." The second cut started, deeper this time. The ridge's interior structure revealed itself, a framework of interwoven bone-like struts that bore the nursery's weight through distribution rather than mass. Load-bearing architecture. And we were cutting through it. More cracks spread through the nursery's walls. A section near the entrance sagged visibly. Inside I could hear movement. Below-born families evacuating, carrying children and bundles, moving deeper into the structure or out into the plains. Lena positioned herself directly between a plasma torch and the ridge. "Stop! You're collapsing it." The crew chief looked at Dalton. Dalton looked at Avery, who'd descended to oversee the operation personally. Avery's expression didn't change. "The operation continues. Medical, prepare for potential industrial accidents. Security, maintain position." The third cut began. Kesh stepped forward, placed both hands against the ridge's surface, spoke through their mouthpiece to the nursery itself. The tone was different, lower, almost subsonic. The cracks stopped spreading. For maybe 30 seconds, the structure stabilized. The walls stopped flexing. The sagging section near the entrance seemed to firm. Then the fourth cut went in, and everything destabilized at once. The ridge shuddered. A crack opened from the cut site down to the nursery's foundation, a split wide enough to see interior chambers. The outer wall buckled. People inside screamed, human voices raw and terrified. Lena grabbed Dalton's arm. "Shut it down, now! One more cut and the ramp frame locks in. We can reinforce. There won't be anything to reinforce if you don't stop." Avery stepped forward. His face had gone pale, but his voice stayed level. "Cease cutting operations. Deploy emergency support scaffolding. Medical teams, prepare for structural collapse casualties." The crews shut down their equipment. The plasma torches went dark. The saws stopped spinning, but the damage was done. The crack continued spreading, slower now, but still moving. The nursery's breathing rhythm had gone chaotic, irregular gasps instead of steady pulse. And from inside, Below-born carried out their families, their elderly, their children, evacuating a home that had sheltered them for generations. Kesh stood at the entrance, hands pressed against the wall, speaking through their mouthpiece in a continuous stream of tones, trying to stabilize, trying to heal, failing. I moved to help with the evacuation. A woman emerged carrying a child whose leg had been crushed when part of the ceiling collapsed. I took the child, laid them on the ground, assessed the damage. Compound fracture, severe swelling, possible arterial compromise. I worked fast, splint, compression, medication for pain and shock. The child's mother crouched beside me, speaking in those percussive tones. And I didn't need translation to understand. Save them, please. Don't let this be for nothing. Ortiz arrived with additional medical supplies. We set up a triage line, treating injuries as Below-born filed out of the damaged structure. Crushed limbs, lacerations from falling rubble. One elderly man with chest trauma who didn't survive despite everything we tried. Lena worked alongside us, setting splints and binding wounds while tears ran down her face. "This is my fault. I should have made them listen. I should have—" "You filed the reports. You gave them the data. This is on Avery. Is it? Or is it on all of us for letting him make the decision?" I didn't answer. There was no answer that made any of this bearable. By midday, the nursery had stabilized. The cracks stopped spreading. The structure still breathed, but shallowly, like an injured animal trying to survive. Kesh stood at the entrance with a dozen other below-borns staring at the damage. Avery approached them, stopped at a respectful distance. "I'm ordering emergency repair operations. Structural reinforcement. We'll stabilize the—" Kesh spat, literally spat at Avery's feet. Then they spoke through their mouthpiece, a tone I'd never heard before. Sharp, furious, final. Then they turned and led their people away from the nursery, toward the distant plains. Avery turned to Dalton. "Security detail on all personnel. The situation has become unpredictable." Lena looked at me. "What do? We find another way." "There is no other way. You tried," Avery refused. "Then we make him accept it." But even as I said it, I knew the truth. Avery wouldn't back down. Dalton wouldn't negotiate. And Kesh and their people had just watched us destroy their home in the span of 4 hours. We'd crossed a line we couldn't uncross. And tomorrow, someone would decide whether we kept building or started fighting. Director Avery called an emergency assembly at 0700 the next morning. Every crew chief, every department head, every security officer. He stood on a cargo platform so everyone could see him, tablet in hand, looking like a man who'd already decided how the story would be told. Yesterday's structural incident was regrettable but manageable. We've assessed the damage to the native structure and determined it remains viable for continued habitation. Our engineering team will implement reinforcement protocols alongside the permanent ramp installation. He swiped the tablet. A new schematic appeared on the projection screen behind him. Phase 2 proceeds with enhanced safety measures. First ramp section deploys at 1400 hours today. Lena stood beside me, arms crossed. He's calling it an incident like it was weather. He's reframing. He's lying. On screen, the schematic showed a massive steel ramp, permanent infrastructure designed to carry heavy transports. The design looked solid, professional, engineered to last decades, and it drove straight through the ridge where the nursery's outer rib had already cracked from yesterday's cutting. Pilar raised her hand. "Director, the ridge structure is compromised, adding that load will be supported by steel reinforcement frames anchored at 12-meter intervals. We're not building on damaged substrate. We're building through it with proper load distribution." Avery closed the display. "Medical teams increase shift coverage. Security doubles perimeter patrols. Construction begins after lunch." "Questions?" Nobody spoke. What was there to say that hadn't already been ignored? Avery dismissed us. Workers dispersed to their stations. I found Jonah near the command shelter, checking manifest sheets with 2 other runners, both older than him, both carrying themselves with the casual confidence of people who'd found their place in the machine. "I need to talk to you. I'm on shift in 10 minutes. Then talk fast." I pulled him aside. "You saw what happened yesterday. The nursery collapsing, people injured. This isn't safe work. People get injured everywhere, that's why you're here. I'm here to treat damage after it happens. I can't prevent it if you're standing under steel frames when something fails." Captain Dalton says the new design is engineered properly. Yesterday was exploratory cutting. Today's different. Yesterday was a warning. Today's commitment. Jonah pulled away. "You want me to quit because you're scared. But I'm not you, Micah. I'm not going to spend my life avoiding risks because something bad might happen." He walked back to the command shelter before I could respond. One of the other runners clapped him on the shoulder, laughing at something I couldn't hear. Jonah smiled. Easy, natural, belonging. Sarah's smile. I forced myself to turn away. The first ramp section arrived at 1200 hours. A prefabricated steel frame 40 meters long, transported down the vault throat in segments and assembled at the base. 8 crew members maneuvered it into position using portable cranes and guide cables. The frame weighed maybe 20 metric tons, solid construction, designed to bear loads that would crush the temporary scaffolding we'd been using. Dalton supervised from the ridge's base, directing crews. His security team had tripled since yesterday. Split cradles deployed at every approach to the worksite. Soldiers with body armor and weapons stood at intervals along the perimeter. I approached slowly. This looks like occupation. It's protection. The below-born haven't returned, but that doesn't mean they've accepted what happened. Dalton gestured at the ridge. We're installing the ramp in 3 sections. First section today, second tomorrow, third the day after. By week's end, we'll have permanent access to the plains. Through a structure that's already failing. Through a ridge that will be reinforced with steel and concrete. The native structure is a concern, but it's not load-bearing once we install proper supports. You don't understand what the nursery is. I understand its biology, and biology adapts or dies. He checked his tablet. If you have medical concerns about the operation, file them properly. Otherwise, stay clear of the construction zone. I walked to the medical station and tried to focus on inventory. Compression bandages, coagulant gel, splints, tools for treating consequences after they'd already happened. Sarah used to joke about that, how I spent my career cleaning up disasters instead of preventing them, how I was always one step behind, patching holes in a sinking ship. She'd been right. Lena found me at 1300 hours. Kesh is here. I grabbed my kit and followed her to the northeast perimeter. Kesh stood alone, maybe 30 meters from the worksite, watching crews position the first ramp section. Their harness showed fresh damage, cracked cartilage plates, repairs that looked recent and rough. I approached slowly. Kesh saw me and gestured. Follow. We walked across the plains, past the tall grass, climbing the ridge to the damaged nursery. The cracks from yesterday's cutting had spread overnight. The outer wall sagged in 3 places. The entrance chamber had partially collapsed, and the breathing rhythm had gone wrong, stuttering in uneven gasps. Kesh led me around the structure's perimeter to the passage I'd seen before, the maintenance tunnel. But now they kept walking, leading me deeper into the network. The tunnel branched. Left corridor led down, walls dark and cold. Right corridor led up, warmer, with that steady exhalation of air I'd felt before. We took the right branch. The tunnel climbed steadily, maybe 12 degrees. The walls here showed tool marks, deliberate shaping, evidence of construction rather than natural formation. We walked for 20 minutes, maybe more. The ceiling panel's light faded behind us, replaced by bioluminescent patches on the tunnel walls, faint blue-green glow that barely illuminated the path. Then we reached a chamber, small, circular, maybe 10 meters across, and at its center, another shaft, vertical, narrow, leading up into darkness. Kesh pointed at the shaft, then at me, then made a climbing gesture. I pulled out my scanner and aimed it up the shaft. The readout climbed. 15 meters, 20, 30, 40. Range exceeded. But the air quality stayed consistent, breathable. And the temperature gradient suggested this shaft connected to the city's lower infrastructure, where cooler air from the upper floors would naturally sink. This was another way up. A route that didn't require the vault throat, didn't require cutting through the nursery's ribs. Narrow, maybe 2 meters across, but viable for people, for cargo haulers carrying trade goods, for a corridor that demanded cooperation instead of conquest. I took measurements, documented anchor points, calculated load capacity and traffic flow. Then I looked at Kesh and nodded. Alternative route, a path that could work if anyone cared to use it. Kesh led me back to the surface. At the ridge's base, they stopped and spoke through their mouthpiece, a sustained tone that felt like a question. I pulled out my comm unit and showed them the measurements. Then I pointed at the permanent ramp being installed, and made a cutting gesture. Then I pointed back at the maintenance tunnel and spread my hands. Open, available, better. Kesh watched me. Then they placed one hand over their chest and spoke a tone I recognized. Home. Then they pointed at the ramp, at the work crews, at the soldiers standing guard, and they made a different gesture, pushing away, rejecting. I understood. The message was clear. Use the tunnel or don't, but stop destroying what we built. Kesh walked back toward the damaged nursery. I climbed down to the work site and found Avery reviewing installation progress with Pilar and Dalton. Director, I need 5 minutes. Avery didn't look up from his tablet. Schedule it properly. There's an alternate route. Maintenance tunnel behind the nursery. It connects to the city's lower infrastructure. We can establish trade access without installing this ramp. That got his attention. He looked at me. Show me the data. I transferred my measurements to his tablet. He studied them, swiping through screens, checking load calculations and gradient analysis. Pilar leaned over his shoulder. These numbers are good, she said. This could work for foot traffic and cargo transport, not heavy equipment, but for agricultural exchange. It's a crawl space. Dalton zoomed in on the tunnel dimensions. 2 meters across. We can't move convoys through that. We can't deploy security effectively, and we'd be dependent on the Belowborn's cooperation to maintain access. That's the point, I said. Cooperation, trade, instead of establishing permanent infrastructure under our control. Avery closed the tablet. This alternate route might serve as auxiliary access, but it doesn't replace the primary ramp. We need capacity for heavy transport, for agricultural equipment, for the machinery required to develop those plains into productive farmland. The nursery is already productive. They grow food there, real food. They have the technology. They have biology. We have engineering, and our population needs more than what they can provide through limited exchange. He handed the tablet back. The ramp proceeds. If you want to map the auxiliary tunnel for backup access, submit a formal proposal. But don't mistake a footpath for infrastructure. The footpath won't collapse the nursery. The nursery is adapting, or it will. Avery turned back to Pilar. Continue installation. I want first section anchored before 1700 hours. I looked at Dalton. He met my gaze with something close to sympathy. You're trying to save something that's already broken. Let it go. It wasn't broken until we broke it. Then we'll fix it, after we finish building. He walked away to supervise the security deployment. I stood there watching work crews maneuver the first ramp section into position, guide cables straining as the steel frame swung toward its anchor points on the ridge. The frame would slot into the existing damage from yesterday's cutting, using the fracture as a natural foundation, engineered to exploit the weakness we'd created. Lena appeared beside me. They refused. They don't want cooperation. They want control. So what do? We do what they're not willing to do, I said. We stop it. How? I don't know yet. But that was a lie. I knew exactly how. I'd known since Avery refused the alternative tunnel, since Dalton dismissed cooperation as weakness, since I watched the first ramp section swing toward anchor points that would seal the nursery's fate. I just hadn't admitted it to myself yet. The operation Avery announced that evening made the decision for me. He assembled the crews at 1800 hours and displayed a new schematic, synchronized deployment. All 3 ramp sections would be positioned simultaneously, then locked into place using a counterweight system. Massive steel weights would be dropped from the vault throat platform, driving anchor bolts through the ridge in a single coordinated strike. Coordinated deployment reduces installation time from 3 days to 6 hours. Avery explained. We lower all 3 sections into position. We align the anchor points. We drop the counterweights. The ramp locks in place, and we're operational by tomorrow morning. Pilar's face had gone pale. Director, that's going to generate massive impact stress. The ridge is already compromised. Concentrated force like that could what? Accelerate structural failure that's already inevitable? The native biology is dying. We can either work around it or wait for it to collapse completely. I prefer the former. This isn't working around it. This is finishing what we started yesterday. Exactly. Avery closed the display. Frame teams assemble at 0600. Counterweight crews prep for deployment at noon. Security maintains perimeter lockdown. Medical teams on standby for industrial accidents. He looked directly at me. No interruptions, no delays. This happens tomorrow. The assembly dispersed. Workers moved to their bunks. Security personnel took up night shift positions, and I stood at the edge of the worksite, watching Jonah log equipment transfers at the command shelter, while Dalton reviewed deployment schedules. Lena moved beside me. If that counterweight drop happens, the nursery won't survive, the whole structure will collapse. I know. Kesh showed you the alternative route. We know there's another way, but Avery's going to proceed anyway because the ramp represents power and the tunnel represents compromise. I know. So what are you going to do? I didn't answer, because the answer required saying out loud what I'd been calculating for the last 3 hours. The counterweight system's load points, the frame assembly sequence, the timing between sections. The places where a small failure could cascade into system-wide collapse. The way to stop the operation without killing anyone. The way to sabotage it. Get some sleep, I said. Tomorrow's going to be difficult. Lena left. I stayed at the worksite until midnight, walking the perimeter, studying the ramp sections lined up for morning deployment. 3 massive frames, each one 40 meters long. The counterweight system used paired steel blocks, 12 metric tons each, that would be hoisted to the vault throat platform and dropped on Avery's signal. The impact would drive anchor bolts through the ridge like nails through wood. Or it would, if the system deployed correctly. But counterweight systems required precise synchronization. All 3 pairs had to drop within milliseconds of each other, or the uneven force would twist the frames and jam the whole assembly. And synchronization required a single control relay, a junction box mounted on the second frame's upper strut, where all 6 drop cables converged. 1 junction box, 1 point of failure. I thought about what would happen if I did nothing. The counterweights would drop. The ramp would lock in place. The nursery would collapse, killing anyone still inside. The below-born would retaliate. Maybe immediately, maybe later, but certainly. Dalton security teams would respond with force. People would die. Jonah would be there, running messages through a war zone, believing in infrastructure that was built on someone else's grave. I thought about what would happen if I resisted openly. Avery would have me arrested. Dalton would assign guards. The operation would proceed on schedule with me locked in the command shelter, watching through windows while the nursery died. I thought about what would happen if I sabotaged the system. The counterweights would drop out of sync. The frames would twist. The ramp would jam across the vault throat instead of locking into the ridge. Both sides would be forced to negotiate because neither one could force the other's hand. The immediate crisis would stop. And I would own the consequences. I walked back to the city, rode the lift to 93, and sat in Sarah's chair. The one I'd kept after she died. The one Jonah never sat in because it still felt like hers. I thought about all the times she'd told me I couldn't control everything. Couldn't prevent every disaster. Couldn't save everyone by carrying the weight alone. She'd been right about that too. But sometimes carrying the weight was the only option left. I descended at 0500, an hour before frame team assembly. The worksite was quiet. Just night shift guards and a few early maintenance crews. I walked to the second ramp section, climbed the temporary scaffolding to the upper strut, and found the junction box exactly where the schematic had shown it. A steel housing 30 centimeters square, secured with 6 bolts. I opened my toolkit. The junction box contained the control relay, a simple mechanical system that synchronized cable release. When Avery triggered the drop, An electronic signal would fire 6 pyrotechnic cutters simultaneously, severing the restraint cables and allowing the counterweights to fall. Simple, reliable, fail-safe, unless someone disabled one of the cutters. I pulled the relay housing open and studied the wiring. 6 parallel circuits, each one feeding a separate cutter, color-coded, clearly labeled. Designed for field maintenance, which meant designed to be understood by technicians who didn't need engineering degrees. I disconnected the blue circuit, cutter 3, serving the forward-left cable on the second frame. Then I took a spare connector from my kit and bridged the circuit with a resistor. The system would register as complete. The diagnostic would show green. But when the signal fired, cutter 3 wouldn't engage. The cable would hold. The counterweight would stay suspended while the other 5 dropped. The resulting torque would twist the frame, the ramp would buckle, and the whole assembly would jam across the vault throat, blocking access from both sides. I closed the junction box and secured the bolts. Then I climbed down and walked away, knowing exactly what I'd done and exactly what it would cost. Crews assembled at 0600. Pilar directed the frame positioning, calling out measurements while workers maneuvered the sections into alignment. The process took 4 hours, careful work, precise adjustments, triple-checking every anchor point before declaring the assembly ready. At 1000 hours, Avery arrived with his media crew. The cameras captured him standing before the permanent ramp, explaining how this represented humanity's resilient adaptation to new frontiers and cooperative development of previously inaccessible resources. Nobody mentioned the nursery. Nobody showed the cracks spreading through its walls or the families who'd evacuated their homes. The story was infrastructure and progress, not consequence and cost. Dalton deployed his security teams at 1100 hours. Perimeter lockdown. Nobody in or out. The work site became a controlled zone with soldiers at every access point. And somewhere in that deployment, Dalton assigned Jonah to the frame team as a runner who could move quickly between the ground crew and the platform team when the counterweights deployed. A reliable messenger, a trusted presence, a 17-year-old kid standing exactly where he'd be in danger if something went wrong. I found Jonah near the second frame, checking cable tension with 2 other crew members. He saw me approaching and straightened. "I need you to do something. I'm on shift." "I know. But there's a supply shortage at the lower cache, compression bandages and coagulant gel. I need you to retrieve them before the counterweight drop." "Can't that wait until after?" "It can't. If something goes wrong during deployment, I'll need those supplies immediately. And the cache is a 15-minute round trip. You need to go now." Jonah looked at the frame, then back at me. "Captain Dalton assigned me to stay close during the drop. He wants runners on site for immediate communication." "I'm overriding that. Medical priority. Get the supplies." Something in my voice must have registered. Jonah grabbed his pack and headed toward the lower supply cache without arguing further. I watched him go, disappearing into the tall grass, moving away from the blast radius I'd just created. Sarah would have been proud of me for that, at least. Avery took his position on the cargo platform at 11:45 hours. Dalton stood beside him, comm unit active, coordinating with the platform team above. Pilar supervised from the ridge's base. The counterweights hung from the vault throat platform, 12 metric tons each, suspended by cables thick as my wrist. The platform team had spent the morning hoisting them into position. Now they waited for Avery's signal. "Frame teams, final clearance check," Avery called through the site-wide comm. Pilar's voice came back. "All frames aligned and secured." "Platform team status?" "Counterweights ready for deployment," came the response from above. "Security perimeter." "Locked and clear," Dalton confirmed. "Medical teams?" I keyed my comm. "Standing by." Avery looked at his tablet, checking the final diagnostic. The screen showed green across all systems, 6 circuits, 6 cutters, everything ready, everything except cutter 3. "On my mark," Avery said. 3, 2, 1, deploy." The electronic signal fired. 5 pyrotechnic cutters severed their cables with sharp cracks that carried across the plains. 5 counterweights dropped. The 6th cable held. For maybe half a second, nothing happened. The counterweights fell. The frames began settling into position, anchor bolts driving into the ridge with impacts I felt through my boots. Then the unsevered cable went taut. The 2nd frame twisted. Metal screamed. The whole assembly torqued sideways as tons of suspended weight pulled against the falling sections. The frame buckled like a spine breaking, ribs of steel crumpling and folding. The cable snapped. The counterweight dropped, but the damage was done. The 2nd frame had already twisted past structural integrity. It swung loose from its anchor points and fell, crashing into the 1st frame, which sheared away from the ridge and tumbled down the slope. The 3rd frame held, barely, but the support cables whipped loose, one of them slashing across the worksite like a blade. I was kneeling by my medical kit when it hit me. The cable caught my left forearm and tore through jacket, skin, muscle. Blood sheeted down my wrist. Pain came a second later, white-hot and immediate. I grabbed compression gauze from my kit with my right hand and cinched it around the wound. My fingers wouldn't work properly. Too much blood. The gauze soaked through in seconds. I added another layer, pulling it tight with my teeth, and tied it off with a tourniquet that made my hand go numb. Around me, chaos. Workers scrambled away from the collapsed frames. Pilar shouted orders, directing teams to check for casualties. Dalton's security personnel formed up, weapons ready, scanning for external threats, while the internal ones crushed people. A rigger lay pinned under the 1st frame's forward strut. I could hear him screaming. 2 workers tried to lift the frame off him. I ran toward them, vision tunneling from blood loss, and added my weight to the attempt. We lifted. The frame rose maybe 10 centimeters, enough for someone to drag the rigger free. His leg bent wrong below the knee. Compound fracture, bone through skin. Lena appeared with a stretcher. We loaded him on and carried him to the medical station. Ortiz started treatment. Splint, compression, medication. I tried to help and my left hand wouldn't grip. Blood dripped from under the tourniquet. "Sit down," Lena said. "I'm fine. You're bleeding through your jacket. Sit down before you collapse." I sat. She cut away the gauze and examined the wound. The cable had opened my forearm from wrist to elbow, deep enough to expose muscle, maybe bone. She irrigated it with saline and began suturing. "What did you do?" she asked quietly. "My job. Treating injuries. I mean before. What did you do to the counterweight system?" "Disabled one cutter. Created asymmetric deployment. You sabotaged it." "I stopped it." She pulled the suture tight. "You jammed the entire vault throat. Nobody can go up or down. We're trapped here." "We're not trapped. We're negotiating." I winced as she started the next suture. "Both sides need that access. Now they'll have to work together to clear it. Or they'll arrest you for sabotage and force the belowborn to accept whatever terms they're given." "Possibly." She finished the sutures and wrapped my forearm in synthetic skin. 23 stitches. Clean work despite the circumstances. "This is going to scar." "Good." Footsteps outside the medical station. Heavy, deliberate. Dalton's voice. "Micah Rosen, come out here." I stood. Lena grabbed my uninjured arm. "Don't. It's already done." I stepped outside. Dalton stood with 4 security personnel, all armed, all watching me with the kind of focus that meant they'd already been briefed. Avery stood behind them, tablet in hand, face carved from stone. "Did you sabotage the counterweight system?" Dalton asked. No point lying. "Yes." "Why?" "Because you were going to destroy the nursery. Because there's an alternate route that doesn't require cutting through their home. Because you refused to consider it. Because someone had to stop you before this became a war." Avery stepped forward. "You've jammed the primary access corridor, stranded workers below, destroyed millions of credits worth of infrastructure, and you've endangered every person on this site by removing our evacuation route. The evacuation route is still there, the maintenance tunnel behind the nursery. 2 meters across, steady grade, viable for foot traffic. It connects to the city's lower infrastructure. Kesh showed it to me 2 days ago. I gave you the data. You refused to use it because it required cooperation instead of control. It required dependence on a population we don't control and can't predict. You mean it required treating them like people instead of obstacles? Dalton moved between us. You're under arrest for sabotage and reckless endangerment. Security will hold you in command shelter custody until we can establish proper charges. Will those charges include the below-born casualties from yesterday's cutting operation? Or the structural damage to their home? Or the fact that you staged a demonstration dragging a Meyerbach through the plains to show them we view everything here as something to control? That's not relevant to your actions today. It's the reason for my actions today. Dalton gestured to his security team. 2 of them moved forward with restraints. I didn't fight. Let them bind my wrists. Carefully, avoiding the injured forearm. Let them lead me toward the command shelter. Halfway there, a tone carried across the plains. Low, sustained, coming from the ridge. Everyone stopped and turned. Kesh stood at the nursery's entrance, 30 below-born behind them, maybe more. They didn't hold weapons, didn't advance, just stood there, watching while Kesh spoke through their mouthpiece, a tone that felt like a statement and a question simultaneously. Dalton's security teams raised their weapons. "Sir? Hold position," Avery said. Kesh spoke again, different tone. Then they gestured toward the jammed ramp, toward the nursery, toward the maintenance tunnel entrance. Lena walked forward slowly. She stopped at the perimeter, pulled out her tablet, and began sketching. A simple diagram. The jammed ramp, the alternate tunnel, 2 paths marked clearly. She showed it to Kesh. Kesh studied it. Then they pointed at the tunnel, then at themselves, then at the jammed ramp and shook their head. 1 route open, 1 route closed. Choose. Avery watched this exchange, jaw tight. Then he turned to Dalton. Assessment. They're offering terms. The tunnel in exchange for leaving the ramp jammed. Unacceptable. We need primary access restored. Then we'll need to force compliance. With what leverage? They control the only other route up, and Rosen just made sure we can't use the primary corridor without days of clearing work. Avery looked at me, and what I saw in his eyes wasn't anger, it was calculation. You've made cooperation the only option. That was the point. He turned back to Kesh, then to Lena. Tell them we need to negotiate access protocols, scheduled transit, cargo inspection, security presence. Lena started sketching again. She showed Kesh a series of diagrams, people moving through the tunnel in both directions, cargo being transferred, guards stationed at intervals. Kesh watched. Then they spoke, a sharp, clipped tone, and gestured at the guards. They don't want armed security in the tunnel, Lena said. That's not negotiable, Dalton replied. Kesh made another gesture. They pointed at themselves, at the other below-born, then at the tunnel entrance. Then they mimed standing guard. They'll provide their own security, Lena translated. Shared patrols, both sides. Avery looked at Dalton. Dalton looked at the jammed ramp. It'll take a week to clear that, maybe longer, and we need supply lines operational. Then we accept shared patrols temporarily, until the primary corridor is restored. Sir, that's giving them control over our access. No, it's accepting that they already have it. Avery gestured toward the nursery, and that Rosen made sure we couldn't take it back by force. He walked toward me. The security team parted. Avery stopped maybe 2 meters away. You've destroyed property, endangered lives, compromised this entire operation, but you've also created a situation where negotiation is the only option that doesn't result in prolonged conflict. He paused. I'm releasing you from custody, but you're reassigned. Effective immediately, your subsurface liaison, responsible for maintaining the alternate access route, coordinating with the below-born on transit protocols, and ensuring both sides can work together without killing each other. That's your job now. Do it or I'll find someone who will." He walked away without waiting for response. Dalton's team removed my restraints. "You got lucky," Dalton said. "He could have had you arrested and negotiated anyway. He's a politician. He recognized when the story could be rewritten in his favor. And you're fine with that, being the scapegoat who forced his hand." "I'm fine with the nursery still standing." Dalton looked towards the ridge where Kesh still waited. "This isn't over. We'll clear that ramp. We'll establish primary access, and when we do, your alternate route becomes auxiliary at best. Maybe. But right now it's all we have, and everyone knows it." He walked away to coordinate security deployments. Lena appeared beside me, holding my medical kit. "How's the arm?" "Hurts." "Good. Maybe you'll remember what it cost." Jonah came running up the ridge path, supply pack on his shoulders, breathless. "What happened? I heard the collapse from the cache." He stopped when he saw my bandaged arm, saw the blood soaking through my jacket, saw the jammed ramp and the collapsed frames and the security teams standing guard over wreckage. "You did this," he said quietly. "Yes." "Why?" "Because the alternative was worse." He turned and walked toward the command shelter without another word. I watched him go, feeling the tourniquet bite into my arm. Sarah would have told me I'd done the right thing. Would have said sometimes the only way to stop disaster is to create a smaller, controlled disaster first. Would have understood why I chose sabotage over surrender. But Sarah was dead, and Jonah wasn't speaking to me. And the nursery still breathed with stuttering rhythm while cracks spread through its walls. I picked up my medical kit with my good hand and walked toward the damaged structure, where Lena was already coordinating with Kesh on supply transfers. Dalton found me at the medical station 3 hours after my release while I was rebandaging a worker's sheath grass extraction sites. He waited until I finished, then gestured me outside. "Avery made a political decision. I'm making a practical one." He kept his voice low. "You sabotaged critical infrastructure, endangered personnel, created a crisis that forced us into dependence on a population we don't control. The crisis already existed, I just made it visible. You made it irreversible." He looked toward the jammed ramp, where crews had begun preliminary assessment of the twisted steel. "That's going to take weeks to clear, maybe months, and in the meantime, we're dependent on goodwill from people who watched us try to destroy their home. Then we maintain the goodwill. By doing what? Asking permission every time we need supplies. Negotiating transit schedules with bone flutes and drawings." He paused. "This doesn't end the way you think it does. Eventually we'll clear that ramp. We'll restore primary access. And when that happens, your tunnel becomes optional. Your negotiated peace becomes a courtesy we extend when convenient. Maybe. But right now, everyone knows cooperation is the only option that keeps people alive. That's a fact they'll remember when the ramp clears." Facts change. People forget. He walked away toward his security teams. I returned to the medical station and found Lena coordinating with Kesh. They'd laid out a rough map on a cargo crate, the maintenance tunnel system marked with distances and elevation changes. Kesh pointed at various sections, speaking through their mouthpiece. "They're offering formal access," Lena said. "Scheduled transits. Both sides provide guides. No weapons in the tunnel. It's too narrow for combat anyway, and they want it clear that this is a corridor for trade, not invasion." "What about cargo inspection?" Kesh made a gesture, opening hands, showing empty palms, then pointing at a cargo crate and miming examination. "Visual inspection at entry points," Lena said. "Both sides. They check what we bring down. We check what they send up. Fair exchange. Avery will want more control than that. Avery doesn't have leverage for more. The tunnel is their infrastructure. We're guests in it." She looked at me. "That's the reality you created. Make it work." I spent the rest of the day mapping the tunnel system with Kesh. We descended through the maintenance passage, documenting anchor points and structural integrity. The walls showed age, older construction than the nursery's main chambers, but solid. Load-bearing capacity sufficient for foot traffic and cargo haulers. Air circulation steady, drawn by temperature differentials between the underground's warmth and the city's cooler, lower floors. At the tunnel's upper terminus, we found the connection, a sealed maintenance hatch that opened into the city's sub-level 40 infrastructure. The room beyond was dusty, unused for decades but intact. Power conduits still ran through the walls, water lines still pressurized. This had been part of the old city's service network, abandoned after the severance and forgotten, until now. I documented everything and submitted the data to Avery that evening. He reviewed it in his temporary office, a prefab shelter that had been upgraded with proper desk and projection screens, while I stood and waited. "This works," he said finally. "Not ideal, not what I wanted, but functional." He closed the display. "You understand this makes you responsible for maintaining it. Any failures, any incidents, any breakdowns in cooperation, that's on you." "I understand. I'm assigning you a team. 2 engineers, 1 security liaison, and a cultural translator once we can train someone in their language. You'll coordinate transit schedules, manage cargo inspection, and ensure both sides can work together without conflict." "What about Jonah? What about him?" "He's been working for Dalton. I want him reassigned. He's 17, he can request reassignment if he wants it." Avery stood. "You sabotaged my operation to force cooperation. Now you get to maintain it. Permanently. Don't make me regret giving you the chance." I left his office and found Jonah near the crew quarters, sitting alone on a supply crate. His jacket hung open despite the cooling air. His expression was careful. I sat down beside him. He didn't move away. "You stopped talking to me," I said. "You destroyed the ramp, put people at risk, got yourself injured. And you didn't tell me you were going to do it." "I couldn't. You were working for Dalton. If I'd told you, you'd have been complicit or forced to report it. So instead you lied about supply shortages and sent me away like a child. I sent you away because I didn't want you standing under steel frames when they collapsed." Jonah looked at the bandage on my forearm. "You got hurt anyway. That was acceptable risk. For you, not for everyone else who could have died." He stood. "You always do this. Decide what's acceptable risk for other people. Make choices that affect everyone and then act like you're the only one who has to live with the consequences. Someone had to stop it. Maybe, but you didn't have to do it alone." He walked away toward the crew quarters. I sat there until the ceiling panels dimmed toward twilight, arm throbbing under the bandage, replaying his words. The formal agreement took 4 days to negotiate. Lena led the effort, working with Kesh to establish protocols that both sides could accept. Scheduled transit windows, cargo inspection procedures, guide assignments, security presence limited to tunnel entrances, never inside the passage itself. Maintenance responsibilities shared equally. The document she produced was 3 pages long, 1 in City Standard, 1 in Below-born visual language that Kesh had helped develop, 1 in hybrid notation that translated between both. It wasn't legally binding by city standards, wasn't recognized by any governmental authority, but it carried Avery's signature at the bottom, alongside Kesh's mark pressed in dark ink that Lena said came from nursery substrate. A contract between 2 civilizations that had almost destroyed each other. The first official caravan moved through the tunnel 6 days after the sabotage. I walked point with Kesh, leading 5 city cargo haulers loaded with medical supplies and structural resin, materials the Below-born needed to continue repairing the nursery's damaged sections. Behind us, 2 Below-born guides accompanied by Lena, who documented everything for the permanent record. The tunnel walls pressed close, 2 meters across, barely enough room to walk side by side. The ceiling curved overhead, low enough that the taller haulers had to duck. Warm air moved past us, carrying mineral taste. The passage descended for maybe 30 minutes, then leveled out and began climbing. My boots found steady rhythm on the smooth floor, worn by generations of below-born feet, polished by use. The walls showed no decoration, no markings, just function, just purpose. We emerged into the nursery's lower chambers. The damage from the cutting operation was visible here too. Cracks in the structural ribs, sagging sections that had been reinforced with nursery-grown beams. But people moved through the space. Children played in corners. Adults tended to substrate trays. The structure still breathed, still functioned, still lived. The cargo haulers unloaded supplies in a chamber cache designated for exchange. Medical equipment stacked in organized rows. Structural resin in sealed drums. Everything the below-born needed. Everything the city could provide. In return, cache led us to storage chambers filled with nursery-grown food. Tubers with waxy rinds, greens bundled in fibrous wrapping, the breadfruit packed in woven containers, real food, grown food, the kind that would make ration increases actually mean something. The haulers loaded it carefully, treating each bundle like it mattered, because it did. We made the return journey in 40 minutes, climbing through the tunnel to the city's sub-level 40 access point. City crews waited there to receive the cargo and distribute it through proper channels. The food would be processed, tested, allocated through existing ration systems, bureaucracy catching up to reality. But it was happening. Trade, exchange. Two civilizations learning to speak through the weight of what they needed from each other. The caravans continued. Every 3 days, cargo moved in both directions. Medical supplies and structural materials descended. Food and nursery-grown beams ascended. The routine established itself through repetition, each transit smoothing the friction of cooperation. I walked every caravan for the first 2 weeks, documenting procedures, resolving disputes, learning the rhythm of maintenance, checking anchor points, monitoring air quality, coordinating schedules so both sides could move cargo without congestion. It was unglamorous work, exhausting work, the kind of effort that required constant attention and showed no dramatic progress, just the absence of catastrophic failure. Exactly what was needed. Jonah's injury happened during the 2nd week. I didn't see it occur. By the time we emerged, the crisis had passed, and Jonah was already in the medical station, with Ortiz working on his leg. The bite had come from something small, maybe half a meter long, quick and low to the ground. One of the plains scavengers that normally avoided people but turned aggressive during cold cycles when prey scattered. It had caught Jonah near the tunnel mouth while he was running messages between Dalton's security teams and the crew quarters. The bite itself wasn't severe. Puncture wounds in his calf, maybe 3 centimeters deep. But the creature's saliva carried bacteria the underground had cultivated over generations. By the time Ortiz started treatment, infection had already spread through the muscle tissue. Lena prescribed aggressive antibiotics. I assisted with wound cleaning and drainage. We saved the leg, but the infection had damaged nerve pathways and muscle groups. The calf would never flex properly again. Physical therapy might improve range of motion, might reduce the limp to something barely noticeable, but Jonah would carry it permanently. He took the news better than I did. Just nodded when Lena explained the prognosis, asked practical questions about recovery timeline, accepted the walking brace without complaint. I sat with him that evening while he elevated the leg and worked through therapeutic exercises, flexing his ankle against resistance bands, building strength in the damaged muscle. Does it hurt? Some. Less than yesterday. He adjusted the brace. Ortiz says I can walk without it in a few weeks, just won't be fast. I'm sorry. Why? You didn't bite me. I brought you here, kept you here, didn't protect you from consequences? From the cost of working in a place that's dangerous? He looked at me directly. You can't protect me from everything. Sarah couldn't protect you from losing her. You can't protect me from living. I didn't know how to answer that. He went back to his exercises. I sat and watched, feeling the tourniquet around my forearm where the sheath grass thread still lay flat under the skin. We both carried marks now, permanent reminders that the underground didn't forgive carelessness. That survival required constant effort. The deserters started 3 weeks after the sabotage. 4 of Dalton's men disappeared during a night shift, just walked into the tall grass and didn't return. Dalton deployed search teams, found no bodies, no evidence of Meyerback attacks, just equipment abandoned at the perimeter and tracks leading toward the far plains. "They're hunting," Dalton told me when I asked. "Some people came down here expecting combat and got maintenance instead. They're looking for something that feels like purpose. By killing Meyerbacks, by controlling something, proving they're not just cargo haulers with weapons." He checked his tablet. "They won't survive long. The underground doesn't forgive amateurs." But they did survive, at least for a while. Reports came back through the below-born, sightings of surface men carrying split cradles, setting traps for Meyerbacks, claiming hunting territory like it was theirs to claim. The below-born assigned scouts to track them, to watch, to know where the threat was and how it moved. The Meyerbacks adapted too. They'd learned that work sites meant noise and people meant danger. They began testing the Vault Throat perimeter at night, drawn by food storage and the promise of easier prey than what the plains offered. Dalton's remaining security teams deployed split cradles as defensive measures, capturing and relocating the creatures rather than killing them. Every dead Meyerback was waste. Every relocated one was a problem pushed elsewhere. The peace we'd forced into existence wasn't peace. It was managed tension, constant work. A tension that never stopped because the alternative was blood. But it held. Cargo moved through the tunnel. Food distribution increased. The nursery's breathing rhythms stabilized as below-born crews completed repairs using structural resin from the city's supplies. Work crews established protocols for avoiding Meyerback territory. The below-born learned enough city language to coordinate without translators. Surface workers learned to recognize the tones that meant danger versus greeting versus assistance needed. Small victories, incremental progress. The kind that didn't make media streams or justify budget increases, but kept people alive and fed. Maintenance. I grew to hate the word and respect what it meant simultaneously. 4 weeks after the sabotage, I returned to the Vault Throat Rim with Jonah beside me. We'd been summoned by Avery for a progress review, standard bureaucratic procedure to justify the resources allocated to tunnel maintenance. I'd prepared reports, documentation, transit logs showing consistent cargo movement and 0 casualties. Numbers that proved cooperation worked, even if nobody wanted to celebrate it. Jonah walked slower now, the brace visible under his pant leg, his stride adjusted to accommodate limited ankle flex. He didn't complain about the climb from sub-level 40 to ground level. Didn't ask for brakes or assistance, just walked steadily, accepting the limitation as permanent. We reached the Vault Throat entrance at midday. The security checkpoint had been reorganized. Fewer guards, more cargo handlers. The emergency response that had defined the first weeks had transitioned to routine. People moved through the checkpoint, no longer treating descent to the underground like entering hostile territory. The jammed ramp still dominated the space. 3 months of work had cleared maybe a third of the twisted steel, pulling it apart piece by piece and hauling it up for salvage. The crews worked methodically, no rush, no deadline. Avery had stopped pushing for rapid restoration once the tunnel proved viable. Why force the timeline when the alternative already functioned? Jonah and I stood at the rim, looking down through the warped metal. The ceiling panels below had cycled to afternoon brightness, steady white that made the false sky look almost natural. Cargo handlers moved through the worksite, loading crates for descent through the maintenance tunnel. A surface crew called out load calculations. A below-born voice answered through bone mouthpiece, the words clipped and precise. I didn't translate. They didn't need me for that anymore. Avery wants to give you a commendation. Jonah said quietly. For what? Establishing bilateral cooperation and maintaining critical supply infrastructure. He pulled a folded document from his jacket. Official recognition of your work as subsurface liaison. Press release goes out next week. You'll be in the media streams. I looked at the document. My name printed in official letterhead. Language that transformed sabotage into problem-solving. Avery's signature at the bottom, turning disaster into achievement through careful rephrasing. Sarah would have laughed at that. Would have said some people needed to control the story more than they needed truth. She wouldn't have been wrong. What about you? I asked. What about me? You're limping. Injured because I brought you here and couldn't keep you safe. You have every right to be angry. Jonah looked down at the worksite, where crews coordinated transit schedules and cargo distribution. I was angry. Still am sometimes. But you know what I learned down there? In that tunnel, walking back and forth with cargo. I waited. Maintenance matters, not the big dramatic moments or the infrastructure projects that get media coverage. Just the daily work of keeping things functional. He folded the document and handed it to me. You taught me that, even if you taught it badly. He walked toward the checkpoint, his limp pronounced but steady. I watched him go, feeling the tightness in my chest that meant I wanted to say something important and couldn't find words adequate. The ceiling panels below shifted toward late afternoon amber. Workers secured their equipment and began ascending for shift change. The routine continued, people moving up and down, cargo transferring both directions, two civilizations learning to coordinate through practice rather than principle. I tightened the strap on my medical kit. The sheathgrass scar on my wrist caught the light, pale threads visible under skin, reminder of the underground's cost. I tried to remove them completely in the weeks after the sabotage. Lena had told me they'd fused with bone at the wrist joint, permanent, inert, present, like the limp Jonah carried, like the cracks in the nursery's ribs that would never fully heal, like the deserters still hunting in the far plains and the below-born scouts tracking them. Scars didn't disappear because you wanted them gone. They just became part of the body's architecture. A cargo caravan emerged from the maintenance tunnel access point below. 6 below-born carriers with bundles of substrate-grown food, accompanied by 2 surface guides. They moved through the worksite with practiced coordination, no hesitation, no conflict. Just work. I descended the ramp toward them, kit in hand, ready for whatever injuries the day would bring. The city wasn't saved. The underground wasn't conquered. There was only this, a narrow passage that demanded constant care, and 2 civilizations learning to speak through the weight of what they almost destroyed. The vault throat still gaped with twisted metal. The permanent ramp might be cleared eventually, or it might stay jammed forever, monument to the cost of speed over sustainability. Either way, the tunnel remained open. The exchange continued. And every transit proved what the ramp never could. That survival required cooperation, not control. Maintenance, not conquest. Unglamorous truth. Exhausting reality. Exactly what was needed. I stepped toward the tunnel entrance, wrist scar bright under the work lights. Jonah's uneven footsteps behind me. The work wasn't finished, would never be finished. But it continued.